Hello and welcome to RAF Fairford in Gloucestershire. Just a few months ago, this was an airbase at war. From this 10,000-foot runway, US Air Force B-52 bombers took off and climbed over the Cotswold countryside, their destination Iraq. We didn't know how long their operations would go on, how soon the war would be over. There were fears that if it was drawn out, the event for which Fairford is best known might not take place this year. But those fears were unfounded. Today the airbase reverts to its peacetime role as we commemorate 100 years of powered flight. In terms of numbers, this is the largest Royal International Air Tattoo we've ever seen, with more than 500 aircraft on display. In this static park are some of the most important types in the short history of aviation. Every period is represented. Indeed, such a diverse collection of aircraft we may never see again. Much more on this later, but first a look at some of the highlights of the flying display. We'll be seeing a great display from the Typhoon, Europe's new fighter, which will shortly be in service with the RAF. There's a look at the A330 Airbus. Its makers would like to see it in military service. Could this be the next NATO tanker? We'll be riding in the A10, the so-called tank buster, just one of the aircraft carrying our cameras this weekend. And we'll be celebrating the 50th anniversary of one of the world's great display teams, Apache de France. But first we go back to the very birth of powered flight. No chance of seeing the Wright Flyer in the air, of course, although there is a replica of it here. Instead, we start with an extraordinary reminder of that day at Kitty Hawk back in 1903. To open the show, we join Sean Maffitt.
In the absence of a flying version of the Wright Flyer, it's quite difficult to find any way of reenacting this amazing occasion of 100 years ago. So the Royal International Air Tattoo came up with a quite ingenious idea of using this 1930s biplane trainer, a steerman, to tow a rather special banner. And in fact, this banner is exactly 120 feet long, which is the length of the Wright brothers' first flight. They're accompanied by the Blue Eagles, the Army Air Corps helicopter display team, for no other reason really than that they fly at about the same speed as the steerman, and most of the other display teams fly rather faster. But they make a nice picture together. But aviation got its first really big boost with the First World War, because as has been the case several times since, it was warlike happenings that caused the greatest developments in aviation. So here's an example that we don't very often see in this country of a German aircraft that dates from just before the First World War. This is the Albatross B-2, made by Albatross Werke. It was a reconnaissance aeroplane, never carried any armament. And here's Klaus Heller flying the rather magnificent 1915 aeroplane. Well, actually it's a replica. You see that very strange seating position. He's sitting well up and obviously keen to get the scarf flying there. This aircraft soldiered on in the role of reconnaissance aircraft into 1915. But by that time, the Allied scout aeroplanes were becoming increasingly hostile, and these B-type machines were replaced by the armed, more powerful C-class aircraft. And so from 1915 on, the Albatross B-2 became a pilot trainer. In fact, just like the Avro 504 in Britain, which had previously been a bomber, but from 1915, and for the same reasons, also became a training aircraft. This aircraft was particularly well suited to training, docile in its handling. strong aeroplane, a slab-sided fuselage covered in plywood. And this replica actually belongs to the Historischer Flugzeugbau at Fürstenwalde, which is just east of Berlin, which calls itself the Aircraft Production and Flight Museum. It did actually have brakes, this aircraft, quite rare for aircraft with tail wheels like this. It had a claw brake in the middle of the front axle. And Klaus Heller brings it in for a beautiful landing.
Well, from the oldest aircraft in the show, albeit a replica, we come to the newest. This is the Eurofighter Typhoon. Years late in development, billions of dollars over budget. But we should see this in perspective. Remember, the Typhoon will be in service for the next 40 years at least. Arriving at Fairford on a damp and windy press day, there was no doubt that this is the star of the show. The man overseeing its entry into RAF service is Wing Commander Charlie Chan. He sees himself as more of a systems manager than a conventional pilot. This aircraft was built for the computer generation.
It will do the vast majority of any mission unimpeded, if you like, by the pilot. It's largely about us taking decisions rather than operating the aeroplane. I don't think it'll take away any sense of self-satisfaction or job satisfaction, but I think it is not a pure flying aeroplane in the way that perhaps, I don't know, a Hurricane or a Spitfire may have been, which required that seat of the pants type ability. This aeroplane is computer driven. It's a completely different level of technology, and it's not about manual flying.
Maybe not, but that doesn't make it any less fascinating to the next generation of pilots. The Typhoon mock-up was one of the show's biggest attractions, and as the display pilot explained, fly-by-wire is not quite what some people imagine.
When you talk about fly-by-wire and computerized airplanes, a lot of people think that everything is automatic. Well, this is not the case, because I cannot push a button and enter display mode and then watch the airplane do it. I have to do it. When we talk about fly-by-wire, it means that the airplane is inherently unstable. So you will not, without computers, you will not be able to control the airplane. But this is very important for a combat aircraft, because the more unstable you are, the more maneuverable you are, if you've got computers that can stabilize you.
Much of the Typhoon display was flown so high that it was difficult for even our cameras to get a good view of it. From a standing start on the runway, it reached 6,000 feet in less than 30 seconds. But unusually for a jet fighter, it stayed almost entirely over the airfield, such is its turning ability. This aircraft can sustain supersonic flight without afterburner, and its rate of roll is remarkable. The RAF took delivery of the first Typhoon just before the show. It's buying 232 of these aircraft, making it the biggest customer. The other partner nations, Germany, Italy and Spain, have also placed substantial orders. In time, Typhoon will replace both the Tornado and Jaguar. It is truly a multi-role aircraft and can carry a wide range of weapons for air-to-air combat and ground attack. It also has an astonishing array of electronic countermeasures. But part of its defense comes from its sheer maneuverability. In this maneuver, it slows from 250 knots to 110 in half a barrel roll. An incoming missile would almost certainly overshoot. The first Typhoons will be based at RAF Coningsby, and it won't just be experienced fast jet pilots who get to fly them. Some will be newly qualified pilots who come to this straight from the Hawk. So that's an exciting prospect for anyone joining the Air Force today. As well as being in many ways the first of its kind, we may also be looking here at the last in a long and distinguished line of manned jet fighters. It's likely that Typhoon's eventual replacement will be an aircraft that does not require a pilot at all. For now, though, it represents a supreme achievement for everyone involved in its long development.
RIAT is a very good place. There are many airplanes on the line, but when I see the Eurofighter, I have no doubt in my mind what airplane I would like to be in. And so I think RAF pilots will think once they start flying, which is very soon this year.
Well, let's go back now to the 1950s. In 1958, a new fighter appeared on the runway at Lambert Field in St. Louis. It was quite unlike the previous fighters. In the 1940s and 50s, fighters were supposed to be sleek and small and agile. This thing was anything but. The F-4 Phantom. It looks sinister. It makes organ pipe type noises. It leaves huge black smoke trails. But to its crews, the Phantom is a thing of beauty. In the 1960s and 70s, it was probably the world's best combat aircraft. And here the Phantom demonstrates in a slow fly-past its naval antecedents. There's its arrestor hook at the back of the aircraft. Capable of more than twice the speed of sound, 1,500 miles an hour. And flying it today for us, Captain Stefan Falkland and Captain Sven Havers of the German Air Force at Neuburg. On the runway now, an aircraft that's about half the size of the Phantom, well, in all-up weight terms at any rate. It does have two engines, the same as the Phantom, both with reheat, but these are about half the power of the Phantom engines. The Saint insignia on the tailplane there, signifying that this aircraft comes from 16 Reserve Squadron. 16 Squadron was formed at Saint-Omer in France during the First World War, which is why they're called the Saints. And this is the GR-3 Jaguar, flown by Flight Lieutenant Mike Hayes. A light reconnaissance and attack bomber, much in use in northern Iraq, also in Bosnia and Kosovo. Here doing about 650 miles an hour, which is about as fast as you're allowed to go at low level in this country. Well, you quite often see pilots waving after they've landed. You don't very often see them waving on takeoff. This guy's obviously a showman. It's Captain Zoltán Zsábor of the Hungarian Air Force, flying his MiG-29. It was in the mid-80s that the Russians produced this magnificent new light fighter. It's not actually all that much bigger than the Jaguar that we were looking at just now. An extremely successful aeroplane from the Mikoyan Gurevich Bureau. Now it looks from the agility that we're seeing here as if it might be a fly-by-wire aeroplane, but it isn't. It's all manual controls, so this is really done by the seat of the pants. But as Zoltán Zsábor spools up the big Tumansky turbines there before he comes in for his touch-and-go landing, and we'll see the engines spool up again in just a moment. And there they're producing something like 18,000 pounds of thrust each. Absolutely enormous engines in quite a small airframe. And the power-to-weight ratio demonstrated by the fact that you can do quite immaculately performed rolls immediately after takeoff. And now demonstrating something that most Western aircraft can't do. This aircraft can actually fly backwards. He's taken the power off the engines and the speed is dropping down to zero, and he's actually going to drop backwards like that. I think probably if you did that with most Western jet engines, they would actually flame out and you'd have to restart them. But round about the same time as the MiG-29 was being introduced, the West was introducing this absolutely splendid aeroplane, the Lockheed F-16. This one belongs to the Royal Netherlands Air Force. It was actually built under license in Europe. And this aircraft is very much fly-by-wire. Wouldn't be able to do this very slow, very high angle of attack fly-past without being fly-by-wire. The computers in the aircraft are making sure that the pilot doesn't stall it or take it outside the flight envelope. And there's that absolutely enormous, probably 25 degrees angle of attack. That's the angle between the longitudinal axis of the aircraft and the airflow. And you can see from the way the smoke is blowing up off the trailing edge how steep the angle is. Now he's back into much more fast forward flight, and the smoke streams more directly back from those smoke winders, they're called, on the wingtips. From 322 Squadron at Leeuwarden, this aircraft is flown today by Captain Christian Louis van Gestel. And coming back up to date, a very advanced Saab BAES JAS 39A Gripen with its canard wing in front of the main wing replaces the tailplane. This is a single-seat swing roll fighter. That means that it can change its role in flight. It can be an air defense fighter one moment and a ground attack aircraft the next. JAS stands for Fighter Attack and Reconnaissance in Swedish. Designed to operate off short, rough strips or even off roads. And here, the now almost obligatory demonstration of the fly-by-wire controls with the slow, high angle of attack fly-past. Captain Martin Bjerkfeldt of the Swedish Air Force flying the Gripen for us today. Gripen means Griffin, by the way. They keep this aircraft simple. It doesn't have anything like reverse thrust or arrestor hooks to slow it down on landing. But it does have these canards, and you can see that they're being jiggled around to get the aircraft exactly into its landing position, and then as soon as it touches down, Martin Bjerkfeldt puts the stick fully forward and the canards go almost down to the vertical position, and that gives good aerodynamic braking, so the aircraft does stop very quickly indeed.
Good morning, sir. A greeting to Captain Matthew Kachukas from his team with the A-10 Warthog, or Tank Buster. This, of course, is a ground attack aircraft. It played a big part in the recent Gulf conflict. But it's also an aircraft we haven't seen very much at RIAT in the past, which is a pity, because it does carry out an excellent display, as we shall see in a minute. So pre-flight checks from Captain Kachukas. He comes from Pope Air Force Base in North Carolina, very close to the scene of that historic flight by the Wright brothers back in 1903. That was at Kitty Hawk. Captain Kachukas has got one of our cameras on board the aircraft, and he's going to talk us through his display.
I'm on the runway now performing my pre-flight checks, last-minute run-up checks. And I've just been given clearance to take off, so now I'm running up the engines and confirming with my safety observer on the ground that he's ready also. There I've released brakes. The A-10 will accelerate fairly quickly. At this point I'm passing through about 50 knots, and shortly we'll see the aircraft start to rotate, and that's at 110 knots right there. And the aircraft will lift off the ground immediately. I'll raise the gear up, level off at 30 feet, and now I'm flying down the runway at 30 feet, accelerating to about 200 knots. At the end of the runway, approaching 200 knots, pull back on the stick. I'll establish a 45-degree climb and climb away from the crowd. I'm looking at the runway. I'll look back at the show lines. I'll try and find references for where the crowd is, where the center point is, how far away from the crowd I should be. I'm now running in from the show right, leveling off at 300 feet AGL, and then I'll be driving straight ahead and pulling into the vertical for a vertical 360-degree turn. This is a descending maneuver. I'm starting at 8,000 feet and I'll end up at 300 feet. Now I'm rolled out on the show line, I'm driving towards show center, and I'm down at 300 feet AGL before I pull back into the vertical. There's a fly up into the vertical. It's about 6 Gs on the aircraft. Looking over my shoulder so I know where the runway is. I watch it go by once, come over the top. This time I'm about 5,000 feet AGL, about 180 knots, hanging out upside down, watching the world, and I'll turn right back up. Sometimes you'll be able to see in the corners of the aircraft the speed brakes, which are right at the edge of the camera view. They'll open and close. With the A10, the opening and closing of the speed brakes gives us a faster roll rate. So normally we won't have them open, but for the demonstration, there you go. You can see them open right there and then close again. It increases the roll rate. It almost doubles the roll rate from what it is with the ailerons closed, with the speed brakes closed. After completing the turn, I'll pull up, climb away from the air show, do a 270-degree roll and position for a strafe pass. These are simulated strafe passes. We can't put real bullets in the gun, but it's just designed to give an example of what a low altitude attack would look like to someone on the ground. There I am, I'm pointed out at final, about 25 degrees of dive, watching the altimeter, watching the ground get big, and then here I go, I'm going to pull up, level off, and then immediately turn away. That maneuver is designed to keep us from going into the explosive pattern that our bullets will leave on the ground. Next part of the demonstration, I'm cruising off to the west here, and I'm slowing down to set up for the slow flight pass. I'll slow the aircraft down from about 350 knots to about 200 knots. You can see on the edges of the screen that the speed brakes have come full open to help slow the aircraft down. And then once I get below 200 knots, there goes the gear handle, and then the flaps go down also. And I'll end up rolling out, flying at 120 knots indicated and about 300 feet down the show line. We'll do this with the speed brakes open in this aircraft because it takes the engines on the A10 quite a lot of time to spool up. So by having the speed brakes open when we're flying, it allows us to fly at a higher power setting in case something were to happen to the aircraft. We can close the speed brakes and immediately have additional thrust. It's quite a long show line here at Fairford, so it's a good chance for me to just take a look out at the crowd, see what's going on, see how many people are out there, and just enjoy the show.
Enjoy it we certainly did. That's Captain Matthew Kachukas in the A10 Tank Buster.
Well, this aircraft heralds the start of a maritime segment. Ocean Watch is one of the main themes of Royal International Air Tattoo 2003. This is the Sea Harrier FA2 from number 899 Squadron at Royal Naval Air Station Yeovilton. Lieutenant Chris Gertka flying it. And at the moment he's flying it as if it were just an ordinary jet fighter, flying by at perhaps 450 miles an hour. But of course the thing about the Harrier is, as well as performing like many another subsonic fighter, it can also do hovering and very short landings and takeoffs. Because of course it has the vectored thrust engine. With a single lever in the cockpit, the pilot can control the direction that the jet comes out of the aircraft. And here it's coming out more or less downwards. So he's slowing the aircraft down so that it's kept in the air now not by lift from the wings, but by thrust from the engines. And you can see on the side of the aircraft there the vectored thrust nozzles, and they're pointing almost vertically downwards. Now these naval Harriers are going to start disbanding next year. The first squadron, 800, will disband in March 2004, and they'll reform in 2006 with GR9 aircraft. That's the RAF version, but they won't have the air defence capability that these aircraft have given the Navy. Well, that was a naval aircraft. This is a Royal Air Force aircraft, but still in the maritime role, part of Ocean Watch. This is the BAE Systems Nimrod MR2P from 42 Reserve Squadron at Royal Air Force Kinloss. If that idea of having the jets in the wing roots looks a bit old-fashioned, well, that's because this aircraft is based on the old de Havilland Comet airliner. Hawker Siddeley, as it then was, made it into the world's first and still only 4-jet maritime reconnaissance aircraft. As Nimrod comes back towards us, you can see that its weapons bay is open, an absolutely enormous bay that can carry things like the Stingray smart torpedo, Harpoon air-to-surface missile. It even has its own Sidewinder air-to-air defence missiles, carries those under the wings. It carries passive and active sonar buoys, and it has huge search water radar. And that probe above the flight deck is a refuelling probe. And the thing sticking out at the back is the magnetic anomaly detector for detecting underwater submarines. An amazing bank, more than 90 degrees, flown by Flight Lieutenant Phil Tett and Flight Lieutenant Elliot Harbottle. Also represented in Ocean Watch is the French Navy. This is a Dassault Falcon 10 MER. That's a maritime radar training aircraft. We can hear from the captain.
We have 6 Falcon 10 in service. You can see it's like a little fighter, and when you're training IFR pilot, it's the same thing, the same sensation, and it's very nice for the pilots to training here. It's the first year we display. It's a try, but I think it's good. I hope.
Well, Lieutenant Commander Gubo took one of our cameras with him onto his aircraft flight deck so we could see him at work in his naval office. He was saying that it has a fighter-like performance. That's because this was developed from the original Mystère Falcon 20, but it's much smaller, this 10 version, but it still had the same powerful engines as the original aircraft, which gave it that more or less fighter-like performance. Lieutenant Commander Gubo is an ex-fighter pilot himself, but he obviously enjoys the handling of this aircraft. The French Navy has it as a radar training aircraft for fighter pilots, but they also use it as a VIP transport, a kind of jet admiral's barge. They're all based at number 57S Squadron at the Naval Air Station at Landivisiau on France's Atlantic coast. And here, the fighter type approach. You can tell that Frederick Gubo enjoys flying this nifty little machine. They also use this aircraft for calibrating and evaluating ships' radars and the self-defense systems that the French Navy uses.
The Ocean Watch theme continues in the static display with many types we seldom see in Britain. Maritime aircrew cover the Earth's most remote regions, from the southern oceans to the Arctic Circle. Their tasks include search and rescue, fishery patrol and photo reconnaissance, as well as combat operations. Over from its base in Brittany, this Grumman Hawkeye is one of two operated by the French Navy. A third is on order. The aircraft provides an airborne radar capability similar to the larger and more familiar Boeing AWACS. But the Hawkeye is small enough to be flown from a carrier, in this case the Charles de Gaulle. These operations require a high level of skill. The Hawkeye is very capable, but flying it accurately is not easy.
It's a very powerful aircraft, engines. It's a 5,100 horsepower per engine, so it makes it difficult to fly, especially for landing on the aircraft carrier. It's a short aircraft, and we have some rudder problems. We have to control always the rudders. Each time we move the throttles, you know, the aircraft shakes on the yaw axis.
But of course you need a lot of power to be able to operate off a short strip like a carrier.
Yeah, we can touch and go on only one engine from the aircraft carrier. If we miss the cables, we can touch and go on one engine, putting the power on one engine only.
And here's the Hawkeye caught by our cameras on departure day. Type conversion requires 18 months training in America. The French Navy has just 6 pilots qualified to fly it from their only carrier. Well, the aircraft in this section of the show are being judged in the Concours d'Elegance, and we caught up with the judges as they made their way around the static display. They weren't difficult to find. All these people are involved in judging this one competition. They have their own drivers and an exclusive VIP buggy for the bosses at the back. This is really a handicap competition with a prize for the most deserving crew. Smartness is not the only consideration.
It's a combination of the appearance of the aircraft, the amount of effort that's been put into maintaining it, cleaning it, compared to its age. Obviously a brand new aeroplane can look really good, but what we really look for is the comparison between the age of the aircraft and its overall condition. And some of them have come a very long way, and some of them have come 50 miles from Benson or somewhere, so it is a combination.
Do the crews really put in a lot of effort to bring these up to spec?
Some of them do put in a tremendous amount of effort, yes, and some don't.
The eventual winner of the concourse was this unusual Antonov AN-28 from Poland. It arrived in a special colour scheme, complete with RAF roundel to commemorate the 60th anniversary of 304 Squadron, whose Polish crewmen flew Wellingtons in Coastal Command. This little transport is used to patrol the Baltic. Though not specially required in this role, it has excellent short-field performance.
The usual landing or takeoff distance is about 200-300 meters.
But you don't often have to take off from such a short strip as that, do you?
Luckily, yes, not. We usually use good prepared and hard runways.
Now, tomorrow morning when you fly away, when you depart from here, we're going to be filming your departure. Would you do a short field takeoff for me?
Unfortunately not, because I was asking for a rather long takeoff, because some photographers are going to take some pictures in the middle of the runway. So we may prepare some short takeoff, then we have to fly low just to give them opportunity to take some pictures.
And that's exactly what they did, giving everyone a chance to see what this smart little Antonov is made of. The very next day it was due back on maritime patrol duties in the Baltic after a very welcome visit to RIAT.
Well, back in the flying display, time now for the all-too brief appearance of one of the most exciting aircraft that we see in the air. This is the extraordinary B-2A Spirit stealth bomber, accompanied, as always at air shows, by its F-15 escorts. Now, this aircraft is involved in a 20-hour round trip from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. Well, here's the other stealth aeroplane. This was called the Stealth Fighter. Well, actually, it's really a bomber, but compared to the bomber that we saw just now, it's a whole lot smaller. And it is actually a member of a fighter squadron, the 9th Fighter Squadron at Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. This is much older than the stealth bomber, and it's made entirely of flat facets. It is still the most extraordinary shape for an aeroplane, extraordinary and sinister. It carries just 2 weapons, 2 2,000-pound laser-guided smart bombs carried internally. Now, we haven't flipped a chapter here. These things are all connected. These are, of course, the Red Arrows, the Royal Air Force Aerobatic Team, in their BAE Systems Hawks, all 9 of them taxiing out to take off. Because the stealth fighter is flown for us today by Squadron Leader Richie Matthews of the Royal Air Force. The Royal Air Force is the only foreign air force which has pilots on secondment to the stealth fighter squadron, and Richie Matthews is an ex-Red Arrows pilot. He was in the Reds from 1995 to 1997. So Royal International Air Tattoo 2003 seemed like an excellent opportunity to get 2 aircraft types flying together that you would never normally see. In fact, you'll probably never see this again, but don't they look wonderful together? But I know it's true to say that this would never have happened had it not been for a lot of liaison between the United States Air Force and the Royal Air Force, and the fact that Richie Matthews and the current leader of the Reds, Squadron Leader Spike Jepson, knew each other well and were prepared to trust each other to do this thing. So after that, the Reds were into their normal display with their 9 aircraft. But of course, they're only one of several international aerobatic formation teams at the show. So let's just take a look at 3 of those teams. Our own British Red Arrows, the Italian Frecce Tricolori, the 3 coloured arrows in their MB339 aircraft, and the Polish Iskry, who fly these Iskra jet trainers.
Well, just one footnote to the Frecce display. Look at this. It's what they call crazy flying, where the solo pilot demonstrates the maneuverability of the Aeromacchi 339. But he's not meant to go below 100 feet, and the Flying Control Committee considered this to be a height bust. It certainly looked low to us. And there was also a reprimand for the pilots of the utterly barnstormers, flying a 4-ship display with their wing walkers. This was considered to be more serious, and they were red-carded, which meant the team couldn't fly on the second day of the show. Safety is a major consideration here at RIAT, as you'd expect. It has to be said, though, that both the Frecce and the barnstormers denied any wrongdoing. Well, now one of the largest aircraft in the show, and a familiar one to most air travellers. This is one of 2 Boeing 757s recently acquired by the New Zealand Air Force. They weren't new, but they're certainly a lot younger than the ageing 727s they've replaced. The 75s will be used to carry both cargo and troops, and also as VIP transports. Among those on the trip to Fairford was the country's Chief of Air Staff and 2 additional crews completing their type conversion. The 757 can no longer be considered a state-of-the-art airliner. Designed in the early 80s, it came before the fly-by-wire generation of transport jets. Nevertheless, it does offer twice the range and twice the capacity of the 727s, with only half the operating costs. For the New Zealanders, you might expect range to be especially important. This aircraft made the longest journey of all to Fairford. But that was no great hardship for those on board. They took 4 days to get here, and it sounds like the kind of flying trip you'd volunteer for.
Rarotonga in the South Pacific for a refuel, then Honolulu for an overnight, San Francisco for an overnight, Washington for an overnight, and then to here. Great to have an airplane which is 100% serviceable every day. It just works a treat. We love it. As opposed to the old 727s, getting more and more unreliable as they got older. And you always had this, every time you departed on a trip, you had this feeling in the back of your mind that something was going to go on. We're going to have a problem with the aircraft on the trip, but these are fantastic aircraft, very reliable. I think the biggest thing we've had is a blown light bulb since we've had it.
Well, now we've just seen the Boeing 757, which Boeing has just stopped producing, but its close relative, the wide-bodied 767, is being offered to the United States Air Force and has in fact been accepted as their future tanker. Well, now this is Airbus's version of the same thing. This is an Airbus A330, and it's going to be doing a demonstration with 2 German Navy Tornadoes. Now this enormous A330, this is the big wide-bodied 2-engine jet, is also going to be a very good tanker. It's part of the highly successful A330, A340 family. They've already sold more than 700 of these aircraft. They now present it as the multi-role tanker transport. It's being proposed by the Air Tanker Consortium for the United Kingdom Ministry of Defence's Future Strategic Tanker Aircraft Programme. And here is the aircraft with the 2 German Navy Tornadoes in the refuelling position. Air Tanker is a joint venture between EADS, Rolls-Royce, Thales and Cobham. And it's being offered by EADS to various other air forces around the world. The the manufacturers say there are many good reasons why this is the ideal future tanker.
If it was going to be designed from scratch as an air tanker, you'd probably end up with something like this. For example, all the fuel that's needed for the program is contained in the tailplanes and in the wings. The wing is more than capable of taking the weight, because obviously it takes the weight of the outboard engine on an A340. So you're able to take that engine off, put this on, and you've got no issues in terms of risk, no issues in terms of design of the wings, or any of the issues of loading, which are normally prevalent when you start re-engineering a commercial aircraft. Tactically, you've got the benefit of the fact that you've got still 293 seats in the cabin, including in-flight entertainment, I'm told, and also through the fuselage without interrupting all the freighting that you need. So basically, you've got the world's best air tanker without any compromise. As you can do air tanking in the morning, troop transport in the afternoon, and freighting in the evening, and the next day do all three on the same sortie.
In fact, EADS say that one of these tankers could get 4 Eurofighter Typhoons from the UK to Cyprus, refuelling them as necessary en route, and at the same time carry 27 tons of freight or passengers.
For many visitors to RIAT, one of the big questions was how long it would take to get in. At last year's show, increased security measures led to long delays. This year, the queues were much shorter, partly because some people stayed away, but also because of changed traffic arrangements and more streamlined procedures for entry to the site. For those who got here early, there were few problems. The scale of this event is always a surprise. This is the biggest military air show in the world. The crowd line is 2 miles long, and to get a proper look at every aircraft on show, you really need to come for 2 days. This year there were also displays on the Friday before the 2 main show days, with a special invitation to young people to attend. Around 20,000 turned up, enjoying the freedom of the site before the arrival of the big weekend crowds. Among VIP guests was Prince Philip on his first visit to RIAT for several years. He was introduced to a lineup of distinguished test pilots. RIAT is much more than an air show. It's a huge charity event which over the years has raised millions of pounds for the Royal Air Force Benevolent Fund. And it's a big event for the aerospace industry. In the hospitality suites, contacts are made and deals are done. It's no surprise that we see demonstrations from the world's leading plane makers. Displays like this are not purely for the public. The stature of this event is summed up by one of its royal supporters.
My father was patron for a number of years of the Air Tattoo, and a great supporter of both the RAF Benevolent Fund and the work that the tattoo achieves. It's special. It used to be special for my father, and it's special for us.
We're now about to see a real rarity on the airshow circuit, a privately operated, fully professional jet display team. They're sponsored this year by the Swiss watchmakers Breitling, who have a long history of supporting aviation, and they fly for Czech-built L-39 jet trainers. The man who leads this team has had many other sponsors and teams in the past. He's one of the best known and best liked figures in the air display business, and the only one of these pilots without an Air Force background.
I'm the only pure civilian pilot. I was flying aerobatic competitions and it was too expensive for me, so I decided to try to fly air shows. How to fly air shows was to set up a team. It was the initial story, and I've been very lucky since 22 years to have a professional team to operate. We're quite happy with the L-39. The point is that it's slightly underpowered, so we have to work a lot. With a team of only 4 aircraft, we have to choreograph a show to be present as much as possible in front of the public. So, well, we have to work a lot, but we're quite happy with the aircraft. Depending the budget I'm going to be able to secure for next season, I might go up to 5-ship display team.
In fact, you'd never believe it to look at Jacques Botelin now, but he had a very bad car accident at the beginning of 2003. He was in hospital for quite a while and still has a slightly stiff back. He is an extraordinary man. He has been running aerobatic teams for a long time. He started in 1980 with some Cap 10 aircraft and then the Pilatus PC-7 turboprop aircraft, and he ran the famous Team Martini. They had to stop doing that because French advertising rules were changed and they weren't allowed to advertise alcoholic drinks. So they then became the Patrouille Echo and eventually Ad Echo. And then he lost half of his team because the sponsorship disappeared. But he finally managed to pick up a new team in 2002 called Khalifa. And that was when he started flying these L-39 jet aircraft. Khalifa is an Algerian finance group. But after they'd supported these aircraft for about a year, they suddenly pulled out of the sponsorship, leaving Jacques Beautelin without any support for his team. Fortunately, Breitling stepped in. Flying with Jacques Beautelin are three ex-French Air Force guys, François Ponceau and Bernard Charbonnel, who both used to fly the Mirage 2000, and Christophe Decateler, who used to fly the Jaguar and the Alpha Jet. But the good news is Jacques Beautelin's persistence has paid off and he has retained the Breitling sponsorship for 2004.
Well, here's something we'd like to have seen in the flying display, but sadly it was not to be. It's the Army's new Apache Longbow helicopter, not yet fully in service and not for the moment taking part in air shows except on static display. The Apache has been used by the United States Army since 1984, but its weapons systems use the very latest technology. Britain will have 67 of them, assembled here by Augusta Westland at a cost of £32 million each. Apache crews use some fascinating gadgetry, including this eyesight which allows them to fire at whatever they happen to be looking at. The electronics in this helicopter are awesome, and so is its firepower.
The main armament is the Hellfire missile, which is the main anti-tank weapon. It can also carry rockets and a combination of the rockets and the missiles. The rockets can be used for slightly lower priority targets than perhaps tanks. What we've got is the area weapon system, which is the cannon, the 30mm cannon underneath the aircraft itself, which we fired at Lulworth ranges, which was great fun actually on earlier in July.
The Apache has a crew of 2. It can be flown from either position, and both men can operate its armaments. This gives flexibility.
The pilot in the back seat, is the driver, if you like. He's the guy that's hands-on flying the aircraft, and whoever sat in the front, what we call the co-pilot gunner, he has more access or greater access to the sights and sensors. So it's traditionally he will be firing the weapon systems, whereas the guy in the back will be firing or flying the aircraft. But as I say, there is a degree of redundancy in there for you to chop and change as to whatever the mission requires.
This was the Apache on the day after the show, heading off for the short flight home to Middle Wallop in Hampshire. Eventually, this machine will replace the Lynx and Gazelle helicopters we saw earlier in the hands of the Blue Eagles display team. Does that mean the Eagles will eventually operate the Apache? At this stage, we don't know. The first crews have now completed their type conversion and will spend the next few months on weapons training. But it'll be another year before the Army Air Corps' first Apache squadron is ready for deployment.
Well, now for something fairly different for a Royal International Air Tattoo. There aren't all that many small propeller-driven aircraft in this air show. But actually, these people have been coming to Royal International Air Tattoos more regularly than almost anybody else. These are the Royal Jordanian Falcons. And their aircraft are Extra 300s. Avco Lycoming piston engines, 300 horsepower. Getting straight into their four-ship box formation. They epitomise the long connections that the Jordanian royal family has had with the Royal International Air Tattoo, almost since the air show started. All four of these pilots are from the Royal Jordanian Air Force. The leader is Lieutenant Colonel Omar Houaj, the right wingman Captain Riyad Adele, the left wingman Captain Jamil Zayed, and in the slot position behind the leader is Captain Ibrahim Hassoune. And as they break there, watch him, he's the one still going up, because he's going into his solo display, and he starts it with a tail slide. The aircraft's actually going backwards there. The Extra, so called because it's designed and built by Valta Extra, is an unlimited class aerobatic competition aircraft. Captain Hassoune pushing up, lots of negative G there, and going straight into a Lomshevak, the aircraft tumbling end over end at one stage. The team has been displaying since 1978. They've displayed to well over 25 million spectators. Done their shows in the Middle East, in North Africa, in the States, in the Far East, and of course in Europe. The Hashemite break. Now as the team comes into land, something interesting here. It's difficult to land an aircraft with a tail wheel in a crosswind. And the one thing you don't do is try and put it down on its three wheels all at the same time, because that gives you all sorts of difficulty. And you can see the aircraft is sideways on to the runway there, and getting even more sideways on, but he does eventually get it straightened out. Now the guy behind him learns from this and lands only on the main wheels, and he's able to keep it straight much more easily.
Most of the aircraft we've seen so far belong to the second 50 years of powered flight, but there is plenty here at Fairford from the early years of aviation. The show organisers decided to make the static park the focus of the Centenary theme, and what a lineup it is. More than 200 aircraft are on show here. Some have flown in, some of them no longer fly, and have come by road from museums and private collections throughout the country. There's a distinctly British feel to this part of the site, a reminder of the great days and the great names of a proud aviation industry. Though it still thrives in projects like the Typhoon and Airbus, perhaps some of the romance has gone. Not so the spirit of cooperation, however. This replica of the Wright Flyer lives at the Yorkshire Air Museum. Too large for road transport, it was brought to Fairford by the RAF in a C-17 Globemaster to take its place in the Hall of Fame. Built in the 1960s, this aircraft has been immaculately restored after suffering some indignity.
Halfway through its life, it finished up as a mobile display in a shopping mall in Leeds. They obviously wanted to change around, so it came up for sale. We purchased it and renovated it to the standard that you see now. It's exactly to scale. The engine, the wings, everything is to scale. We've had to use modern fabrics to give it a longer life than what it had previously.
The machine was flown from a lying position. Pitch control was almost conventional, but roll was achieved by a body movement which warped the wings. How awkward was this? No wonder that first flight lasted only 12 seconds, but the Wrights had definitely started something. Within 6 years, Blériot had flown the English Channel and the first pioneers of air travel were beginning to emerge. Soon the aeroplane was a weapon of war, with British makers at the forefront of technology and the birth of the Royal Air Force. Then came 2 decades of rapid civil development through the interwar years. There were the Hendon Air Pageants, the biplane trainers, and graceful transports like this de Havilland Foxmoth. Modern light aircraft would struggle to match its performance on such a small engine, and few indeed could match its style.
It's pretty amazing to be able to fly either 4 or 5 people around on one Gypsy Major engine. Surprisingly, this aeroplane's got the 145 horse engine in it, and it does exceptionally well. It's the only aeroplane I know that gets wider from the cockpit forward, so it's very difficult to see out, but the instrument panel is in 2 separate bits with a porthole in the middle so that you can see through to the passenger cabin, pass them notes and have your sandwiches passed up if you're on a long trip.
But sedate travel for the wealthy few would not be the future of air transport. The Douglas DC-2 was the forerunner of perhaps the century's most successful family of airliners. They would make flying relatively safe and start a relentless trend towards larger and larger aircraft. This example is a visitor from Holland, one of the few still preserved. Though commissioned by a major American airline, production of the DC-2 would be short-lived.
The DC-2 was built in order for TWA, but as soon as they got it, they noticed that it was too small. It can only carry 8 to 12 passengers. The DC-3 was immediately afterwards developed and could carry up to 28.
This DC-2 has been flying almost continuously for the last 68 years. Its owners rely on show appearances to pay for its upkeep. This was it departing from Fairford. Let's hope we see it again someday. Our tour of this fascinating collection now moves on to the Second World War. The number of flying examples from this period is on the increase, such is the current fascination for warbirds. More than 50 Spitfires survive, around half of them in this country. This, though, is one of just 2 airworthy Lancasters. It's the flagship of the RAF's Battle of Britain Memorial Flight, although it took no part in that campaign. This Blenheim came to Fairford as the only flying example in the world.
Support the only airworthy Blenheim flying in the world today. Have a chance to win a flight in a Spitfire or a Vampire. Tickets are only £1 each. Get your tickets here today.
Just a month after the show came sad news for the Blenheim supporters. It was seriously damaged in a crash, though fortunately there were no injuries. The Blenheim will be repaired. We now move on to the jet age and some classics from the 50s and 60s. There's the de Havilland Venom, with variants used as both a trainer and fighter bomber. America's F-86 Sabre, one of the first aircraft to go supersonic, and the rather tricky Gnat, which was used by the Red Arrows before the arrival of the Hawk. The Canberra is still in RAF service more than 50 years after it first flew. The makers, though, had other plans for this example. As the Cold War called for high-altitude surveillance, they sought to explore the edge of the flight envelope.
It never actually saw active RAF service. It went straight to have a Scorpion rocket motor mounted in the back, and in 1957 it got the world altitude record at 70,310 feet. It's actually the last one flying in private hands in the UK at the moment. There's 1 or 2 in Australia and a couple in the USA.
You could easily spend an entire day at this Centenary exhibition, and I doubt if even the most knowledgeable enthusiast would recognise everything on show. Of course, RIAT static displays have always been a big part of this event, and it's not just historic aircraft which are on view. Here we're right up to date with the C-17 from nearby Brize Norton, the very one that brought the Wright Flyer replica to the show.
Most of the aircraft from the first half of the centenary of flight have been in the static display. But this aircraft is definitely part of the first 50 years. This aircraft type first flew in 1932. This is the Junkers Ju-52, Tante U, Auntie U, or Iron Annie. Magnificent old transport aeroplane. The original Ju-52 was actually a single-engine transport aircraft, but it was found to be somewhat lacking in performance. So what do? They just added an engine onto each wing, making it the Ju-52 3M for 3 motors, the 3 Motoren. It was an immediate success. One of the best civil airliners of the 1930s, and it remained Germany's best transport of the Second World War. More than 4,800 of them were built, and they sold to more than 30 different airlines. They made up more than 3/4 of the Lufthansa fleet between the wars. In 1935 they introduced a military version which could carry a 3,300-pound bomb load and had guns. This particular aircraft is in the colours of a Luftwaffe squadron for the invasion of Crete in 1942. This was a magnificent restoration by the Amical Jean-Baptiste Salis in France. It took 19,000 man-hours to produce this aircraft to the wonderful condition in which we see it today. And coming right up to date in the transport world, the Lockheed Martin Alenia C-27J Spartan, brand new transport aircraft. If it looks like, well, roughly half a Hercules, that's really what it is. It has plenty in common with the C-130J Hercules. The two pilots here, Gianluca Evangelisti on the left and Agostino Frediani on the right. They were, in fact, the 2 test pilots that conducted the maiden flight of this aircraft in September 1999. A lot of commonality with the Hercules, which is why Lockheed Martin came in with Alenia to build this aircraft. It has the same engines that the Hercules has, except that there are only 2 of them. This also is the J version, that's to say it has the 5-bladed propellers and the electronic flight information system. The Italian Air Force have ordered 12 of these aircraft, and Greece has also ordered 12. They're expected to be delivered in 2004 and 2005. It has an opening ramp at the back. It's capable of carrying military vehicles like Humvees and small armoured vehicles, and it will also drop paratroops, up to 24 of them. Capable at its maximum speed of about 360 miles an hour. Also capable of very short landings in tactical field conditions. And watch this one. Gianluca Evangelisti puts it down on all 6 wheels at once, and immediately puts the engines into reverse thrust so the aircraft slows down very quickly for a very short landing. Leaving the reverse thrust in, of course, means that the aircraft can also go backwards, which is always handy when you need to manoeuvre on a restricted space tactical airfield. And here is the C-27J's big brother, the C-130J Hercules, this one of the Royal Air Force, doing a tactical demonstration, inserting troops into a perhaps hostile airfield. A very short tactical landing. all four of the Rolls-Royce Allison engines going into reverse pitch. And as the aircraft slows down, the ramp coming down at the back. And you can see the tow ramps folded up there. In a moment the two loadmasters will jump out as soon as the aircraft has come to a stop and put those tow ramps down. There they go, and immediately two vehicles come out. Immediately starting to take up tactical positions. Meanwhile, the aircraft is getting ready to take off again, and to avoid having to turn round and go back to the end of the runway, it has all four engines in reverse pitch. The pilot, of course, can't see where he's going at the moment. He's being guided by the loadmasters standing looking out of the ramp at the back. The one thing the pilot mustn't do is put the brakes on, because the aircraft will tip on its backside if he does. He just puts the engines into forward pitch, and almost immediately the aircraft is starting its takeoff run. A tactical takeoff, and as soon as he's airborne, he wants to get the aircraft as high as possible, so that if there are any small arms around the airfield, he'll be out of their range as quickly as possible. The captain of the aircraft is Flight Lieutenant Steve Forster. He captained the first night low-level resupply mission into enemy territory in Iraq early in 2003. Now a demonstration of the Khe-Sanh tactical approach. The aircraft keeps as high as it can for as long as possible and then makes this really steep dive towards the runway. Beginning to pull out only when he gets close to the runway, and then putting the aircraft down right in front of the President's enclosure and immediately slamming the reverse pitch in so that the aircraft stops in almost no time at all.
Well, this lucky man is going to fly the only Spitfire in the flying display. He's Phil O'Dell, the Rolls-Royce chief test pilot. Rolls, of course, have a long connection with this type. They built the original Spitfire Merlin engine and also the Griffin version, which is in this Mark 19 Spitfire. And the blue colour scheme shows that it was used for photo reconnaissance. In fact, this aircraft is in its original colours. Phil is going to carry out a solo display, and on board the aircraft he's got one of our mini cams. So as he taxis out to the runway, let's hear him describe the action.
Sat at the end of the runway waiting for the clearance from air traffic, acknowledge that clearance from air traffic and then start smoothly pushing up the power. The Griffin turns to the left as I look at it from the cockpit, so the aeroplane will want to swing slightly to the right, so a little bit of left rudder to keep it on the centre line. Easing up the power, looking for +7 on the boost gauge and 2600 RPM. Working reasonably hard to keep it on the centre line, lifting the tail gently, not too high, very nose heavy the Griffin engine aeroplane, up, and then a quick change of hands as the gear goes up. And then starting to come to the left to position for the display. The Griffin engined Spitfires don't tend to run as hot as the earlier marks of the Merlin engine, but still a lot of care needed for oil temperature and coolant temperatures. Starting to run in on what is known as the B-axis, pointing directly at the crowd. Going to start the display with a half horizontal from that B-axis, pointing, as I say, directly at crowd centre. So looking ahead, trying to make sure I've found crowd centre and timing my pull-up. I've got a headwind today, which is pushing me away from the crowd, so making it slightly easier. But I have to make sure that my pull, which is starting now at about 3.5, 4G, is in enough time that I come up to the crowd line, but obviously not over the crowd line. So it looks like I've got that pretty much right. Over the top, looking back down for the horizon and rolling out again with plenty of height to spare. Starting to come left now, looking over my shoulder, trying to pick up the display line, easing off the bank and then pulling on a little bit more G and a little bit more bank to time that roll out so I show the classic Spitfire shape directly to crowd center, and then starting to release the pull, climbing for a derry turn. Quick look down at the temperatures and pressures, and then I'm going to roll underneath, trying to keep it as smooth as I can and stopping the bank there and looking for the display line back over my right shoulder. Just judging and playing and feeling the angle of bank and the G to allow the aeroplane to accelerate. Probably doing about 220 knots here, got +7 on the boost and sticking at 2,600 RPM. Slackening off a little bit to allow the aeroplane to accelerate, so I'm looking for 240, 250, 260 knots here as I fly through the crowd line. I'm going to pull up for a victory roll. Quick check of the engine temperatures and instruments again, up into the pool, nice nose, high attitude and rolling.
Phil O'Dell in the Rolls-Royce Mark 19 Spitfire.
Now here's an aircraft that once again demonstrates France's determination to go it alone in the aviation world whenever it can. This is the highly successful Dassault Mirage 2000, the 2000. Pilot Captain François Forget running through his display on the ground before he gets into the aeroplane. He's in his second year as the Mirage 2000 display pilot. The tailpipe of the enormous Snecma M53 turbofan, 21,500 pounds of static thrust in reheat. Critical audience of the Tornado crews watching him taxi out. And our minicam is on board the aircraft, just behind Captain Forget's shoulder. The big M53 engine gives it enormous acceleration on takeoff. And immediately we get an impression of the amazing manoeuvrability of this aircraft, which is strange because it is a straight delta without a separate tailplane. Now in the past that would have meant that it was not very manoeuvrable, but this aircraft has fly-by-wire, and the fly-by-wire actually makes it an unstable airframe. It gives it enormous manoeuvrability, always kept in check by the computers. Captain Forget keeping the nose on the horizon in this steep turn. Mirage 2000 is a genuine multi-role combat aircraft. It can do air defence, reconnaissance, air-ground attack, anti-shipping, and there is even a nuclear strike version. This is a single-seat 2000C air defence aircraft. They refer to it as being in the 10-ton class of fighters. It's got nearly 10 tons of thrust as well as 10 tons of weight. So there it is, the Mirage 2000 from Escadron de Chasse 2-5 at Orange in the south of France. Well, now we're up amongst the big boys again. This is the Rockwell B-1B Lancer. This is an enormous bomber. 477,000 pounds it weighs at maximum all-up weight. That's not far short of the size of the B-52. But a somewhat better performance than the B-52. It'll do Mach 1.25, 1.25 times the speed of sound at altitude. Those four big engines, the GE F101 engines, more than 30,000 pounds of static thrust from each of those engines. Supersonic penetration bomber, but clearly not supersonic here, with the wheels down for a slow fly past. Those flaps and droops down again. But it also operates frequently at low level, and at low level its maximum speed is about 650 miles an hour. And here it's not far off that maximum speed of 650 miles an hour, with its wings swept back. Operated today by a crew from the 28th Bomb Squadron at Dyess Air Force Base in Texas. Major Andy Thomas Breaker, Captain Jeff Warmker, Captain Scott Mansfield and Captain Lee Williams. Although this is a Dyess crew, you'll see from the EL on the tail fin that this is actually an Ellsworth Air Force Base aircraft from the 28th Bomb Wing. An extraordinary view with the all-flying tailplane fully up so as to give maximum aerodynamic braking for this aircraft, which does not have reverse thrust. Towards the end of the show, we were able to reflect on the 100 years of powered flight and remember some of the people who have died in the course of aviation's first century. We started with a flypast by 4 F-16 aircraft of the United States Air Force. And then we remembered some of the individual names, civilian and military. Amy Johnson, the pioneer solo distance pilot. John Derry, the test pilot extraordinary. The crew of Apollo 1 who died in a practice launch. And we ended the remembrance of these people with another flypast by 4 military aircraft, this time from the Royal Air Force at Marham.
Well, as we mark the centenary of the aeroplane, we also celebrate a milestone for the French national display team La Patrie de France. In their 50th anniversary year, they've been breaking new ground. They gave their first display in Russia, something that would have been unthinkable when the team was formed back in 1953. Today the talking point is the weather. Is it good enough for their full display? If not, they will carry out their intermediate show, for which they need a cloud base of 3,000 feet. We could see a mixture of both displays. There are several points at which team leader Christophe Giraud can tell his pilots to switch from one routine to another.
I can change to intermediate to good weather or bad weather. I can change several times, different time during the show. It's difficult. It's more difficult than if there is no change, but we can switch from bad weather to good weather.
Like most of the great display teams, La Patrie have a party piece which is all their own. Here we see it filmed from the air in a recent display over southern France. The aircraft invert in 2 pairs and one group of 3, leaving only the leader flying the right way up. This is a difficult manoeuvre in tight formation.
It's one of the most technical maneuver of the patrol, and it is allowed by the Alpha jet, which is excellent for that kind of maneuver.
So back to Fairford and the takeoff from the Fairford runway in 2 sections of 4, making 8 aircraft altogether. And the 50-year celebration markings on the tail fins. Of course, 50 years making them exactly half the age of the aviation century. The Alpha jets looking like flying fish. The Dassault Dornier Alpha jet, advanced trainer, somewhat equivalent to the British Hawk, but with 2 engines instead of 1. And the formation spreads out a little so that they can do an interesting manoeuvre, a 360-degree individual roll from each aircraft. And then they close the formation up again. They call this formation diamond, although actually it's missing the bottom point of the diamond. Unlike the Hawk, this is a high-wing aircraft, the wing on top of the fuselage rather than underneath. And underneath, in the magnificent paint job that they have on these aircraft, you can see Armée de l'Air, literally the Air Army, or as we would say, the Air Force. In flesh formation there, meaning arrow. But now coming next, the manoeuvre that we saw from the inside of the formation just now, when everybody rolls upside down except the leader. And the last 2 to roll out do it as a rollback. An éclatement, the brake, into a magnificent palm tree. Having split up, 2 pairs of aircraft heading towards each other to cross over in the middle of the runway, silhouetted against the lowering sun. Now, something that the Red Arrows also do, an amazing jippo brake. Wheels down, or should that be wheels up, for 2 aircraft who look as if they might as well be glued together. The formation is so perfect. And in this 50th year celebratory season, their last manoeuvre is a perfect heart in the sky, and unusually for hearts made out of smoke coming from aeroplanes, this one seems to be enduring. With love from the Patrouille de France.
Well, that's just about it on a weekend in which we've marked the centenary of that astonishing achievement by the Wright brothers. 100 years in which the world has been changed immeasurably by the miracle of powered flight. Next year's Royal International Air Tattoo will be another special show when all the armed services will be taking part in a special review, Defence 2004. We hope to be back for that, but for now, from all of us here at RAF Fairford, it's goodbye.